Hi, so I had a question in the week from one of my American brothers who asked the question how to make a cup of tea. And I was thinking about it and I thought this actually might be quite an interesting thing to show and also to have a little chat because there's quite a few involved ideas around tea, particularly between American and British culture. Historically, it's quite a profound subject that's had huge implications, more than maybe people realise. So what we're going to do, we're going to make a little cup of tea. I'm going to show you the way to make a perfect cup of tea, and then we'll have a little chat. So first of all, I'm just going to boil the kettle. Right, now the kettle's boiled, I should probably say you can use any water with tea, and I quite enjoy using a tin cup, but again, a cup is quite a personal thing, and in an English household, every person is going to have their favourite cup and their cup that they like to use. So yeah, this is just a personal thing. I quite enjoy using this one at the moment, but it does change. And for me at least, I only really drink two types of tea. I drink Yorkshire tea, which is my favourite black tea, and I do drink Tetley's tea sometimes if I'm in a pinch and I can't get Yorkshire tea, but I also quite enjoy using decaf Tetley's tea because sometimes in the evening or something, if you want to have a cup of tea but you don't want to be kept awake all night, it's quite good to have decaf. So there's a little bit of an art to this, and yeah, everyone has their own way of making tea, but I think I'm somewhat of an expert on it now, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But first of all, you just add your tea bag, grab the milk. I like to use full fat milk. Again, most families have a preference. My family, it's always full fat milk. Nice and cold. My milk's so cold it's actually got a little bit of ice forming. So what you want to do now is, ordinarily I would put the tea bag in, add the milk, and then I boil the kettle so that it gives the tea bag a little bit of time to get acquainted with the milk. And what that's going to do, it's basically going to activate the tea without burning it. Because if you don't put the milk in first and you just immediately put the hot water and then you put the milk, you're going to find that you burn the tea and you get maybe like an undesirable, chalky, bitter taste. So yeah, I'm just going to activate that a little bit. Obviously, if you just leave it in there for a few minutes while the kettle's boiling, you can skip this step, but tea and milk. Then you're going to add boiling water. Now you're just going to, a little bit more in there. Now you're just going to let that steep. You don't need to stir it or anything. You can just leave that to steep now. Generally, I'd leave this for about 3 to 5 minutes. Depends how much milk you use. But yeah, we'll do that, and I'll be right back. I'll let that steep. Okay, now that's done steeping, we're going to remove the tea bag. What I like to do is actually use a tablespoon rather than a teaspoon. The reason being is you can actually just give it a little stir at this point. You don't really need to like keep beating the tea bag like this to get the tea out of it. You can basically take a tablespoon, put the tea bag on it, and you could just leave this for a minute or two so that you don't burn your fingers when you have to try and get the rest of the tea out of there, because most of the tea flavour is now in that tea bag, it's not in the cup. So I mean, my fingers are pretty tough, so I'm just going to squeeze it out there. This also helps for this section, whereas if you try to do it with a teaspoon, it's a little bit more difficult, but you're going to see most of the flavour coming out there. Rich, dark tea. Try and get all that you want, and again, this is to taste. But there is kind of a universal, we call this a builder's tea, but there is a universal, if you make someone a cup of tea, this is, unless they are specifically, make it very milky, make it very dark, something like that, they request something specifically, this would be your generic, ubiquitous cup of tea. And the reason why this is such a lovely cup of tea is because the viscosity of the tea, it's not watery. See, the worst thing for an English person is to get a watery cup of tea. It's disgusting. We don't like that. So you don't want it so milky that it's like drinking a milkshake, but you also want it so it's thick enough to actually feel like you're drinking tea. So the combination of the tea and the milk, you have to balance those two elements perfectly to get the perfect cup of tea. So really, if you had put too much milk and you felt that this was too, for some people this might still be a little bit light. So you can just leave the tea bag in until you feel like you're at the stage where it's the colour that you like. And then at that point, you can take the tea bag out. Obviously I've got this roughly where I want it already, so no need for that. But yeah, it's a simple thing, but there's a few little details which make making the perfect cup of tea maybe not as simple as it appears on first sight, especially if you've not grown up, as we generally do in England, making tea for every occasion. Anyway, gonna sit and have this and we'll have a little chat. Cheers. Now, maybe you're asking yourself, well, what makes you an expert on tea making? And probably most of you don't know, but when I was younger, I was a bit of a dreamer and an artist, and my father, who was an engineer and a much wiser man than I am, he basically enrolled me on a 7-year carpentry and joinery apprenticeship. I think to ensure that I didn't starve to death. And of course, when you do something like that, I was working in a fairly big firm, and my job is, of course, to make tea every day. And if you make the tea wrong, boy, do you hear about it. You know, I'd like to say it was a 7-year apprenticeship in tea making. And there is a sort of standard that people were expecting at work when you make tea. They want it to be satisfying and a full body, not too watery. So it's a bit of a process you have to learn. And if you get it right, you know, you become everyone's best friend. But if you get it wrong, it's not so great. People take it seriously in England. They used to back then. I think tea has sort of become less popular because of the rise of coffee. A lot of people drink coffee now, but most building sites you'll still find people drinking tea. And the reason tea is preferable to coffee, particularly when it comes to pipe smoking, is it's got a very neutral taste really. It cleanses your palate. It's quite refreshing. You can drink tea even on a hot day and it's gonna, not like coffee where if you drink hot coffee you feel quite sluggish, whereas tea, it's not. You actually feel quite refreshed when you drink tea. And yeah, it's just a much easier thing to drink, I think, when you're having a pipe or something. I mean, I love coffee as well, but it's really good. And you don't get the same come down that you get from coffee. You obviously get about the same caffeine in a cup of tea. People think that coffee is a stronger caffeine content, but it's actually not. Tea is about the same, but it's just a much slower release of caffeine. You don't get that horrible come down. You also won't get the withdrawals that you get from coffee. But yeah, I was sort of thinking about it a bit more because, as I'm sure all Americans know, it was basically tea that sparked the American Revolution in 1773 when basically the East India Tea Company got itself into trouble doing nefarious things. It was the Crown that had to bail it out, and in order to mitigate those expenses, they raised the taxes on the American colony, and that's where you got the Tea Party, Boston Tea Party came from. I'm sure this isn't news to anyone in America, but yeah, it sort of got me thinking about tea because tea was basically the main thing that expanded the British Empire during that period, and it was because of the trade, it was because of the advances in the naval, because the tea ships were designed to basically get such a quick turnaround where they had to go from China back to the UK, that it sort of advanced shipbuilding to such an extent that it improved the navy. It also gave the British ways to trade and to build connections, which really just supercharged the expansion of the empire. And tea itself, you know, once the British people had tea, like not only was it economically boosting the economy, but also people drinking tea, it's sort of like, I think it increased the energy levels to a large extent. And yeah, the rest is history, as they say. But I was also thinking about really how important tea is. Some of the worst things that may have happened to someone, it's very common in England. If something very bad happens to you, I remember when I was young, I had a really bad breakup with a girlfriend. I took it pretty hard. And my mum went and made me a cup of tea. She said, "Oh, I'll go and make you a cup of tea." And I thought to myself at the time, how's that going to help? A cup of tea? Come on. And I'll never forget drinking that cup of tea, and it was soothing. It was so soothing. And yeah, I realised in that moment, like, how it gives you a warm hug, a cup of tea. It encapsulates nostalgia, a sense of belonging, just in a simple beverage. And obviously there's some satire in this, you know, telling you I'm an expert on making tea as if there's such a thing. I'm sure, well, there probably is, but I'm definitely not an expert. This is just my take on how to get a really nice cup of tea. But yeah, I'm smoking early morning pipe today. I think any English blend really goes great with a cup of tea. Or Virginia, because it's just such a neutral but refreshing beverage. Anyway, just some thoughts on that. I thought it might be fun. Yeah, because someone did ask me the question, so I thought, yeah, it might be fun to cover that and just expand on it a little bit. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Thanks very much for watching. If you've got any ideas on tea making, maybe you do it differently. Maybe you semi-skimmed, maybe you add the hot water first. Maybe you don't know how to make tea at all. Maybe this has been educational. Please let me know your thoughts. If you have any thoughts on the historical elements of it as well. I'm not an expert on that. Obviously, most of what I've just said, I just remember from what I learned in history. So yeah. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Have a great week. Bye for now.